Last year I picked up a delivery shift that would haunt me for a long time. It was around 10 p.m. when I grabbed the last order of the night, a small veggie pizza, and headed out to the address given. The house was on the outskirts of town, one of those places you only go to if you have a specific reason. As I drove, the neighborhoods transitioned from busy suburban streets to sparse rural ones. The GPS announced that I had arrived, but all I saw was an old, run-down farmhouse surrounded by overgrown fields. The house was in complete darkness, no porch light, nothing. Hesitantly, I walked up to the front door, pizza box feeling oddly heavy in my hand. I knocked a couple of times and waited. No response. I knocked again, a bit louder this time. I could hear the echo of the knock inside the house, which seemed completely empty. Just as I was about to leave, thinking maybe I had the wrong address, the door slowly creaked open. There was nobody there. I peeked inside, calling out, "Pizza delivery! Anyone home?" No response, just the sound of the wind whistling through broken windows. Against my better judgment, curiosity got the better of me, and I stepped inside, leaving the door ajar behind me. The inside of the house was as eerie as the outside. It looked like it hadn't been lived in for years. Dust covered everything, and old newspapers were scattered across the floor. The furniture was draped with white sheets, giving the whole place a ghostly vibe. I walked a little further in, still holding the pizza. "Hello?" I called out again. Suddenly, a strong gust of wind slammed the door shut behind me. I jumped, heart racing, and when I turned back to open the door, I noticed something moving upstairs. Panicked but intrigued, I placed the pizza box on a dusty table and slowly made my way up the creaky stairs. At the top, I saw a door slightly ajar. I pushed it open, and inside I found a dimly lit room with candles everywhere. And there, sitting in the middle of the room, was an old woman. She looked frail and was dressed in an old-fashioned nightgown. Her eyes were fixed on a small, outdated television, static flickering on the screen. She didn't seem to notice me at first, so I cleared my throat and said, "Ma'am, I have your pizza." She slowly turned her head to look at me, her eyes unnervingly bright in the dim light. "I didn't order any pizza," she whispered hoarsely. Confused and now seriously freaked out, I apologized, explaining I must have the wrong address. As I turned to leave, she spoke again, this time more urgently. "No, wait. You must eat. Stay, please." The way she said it, like a plea or a command, sent shivers down my spine. I declined as politely as I could and hurried back downstairs. Grabbing the pizza, I struggled with the front door, which seemed to have jammed. After a tense moment, it finally swung open, and I didn't look back until I was safely in my car. Driving away, I glanced at the rear-view mirror and saw the old woman standing in the window, watching me leave. The look in her eyes and the chilling encounter left me uneasy the entire drive back. I told my manager about the mix-up with the address, and when we checked, it turned out there had been no order from that area at all that night. Who, then, had placed the order, and why? I still get goosebumps thinking about that night. Whatever was going on in that house, I was just glad to get out of there. This one night I was working my usual shift at the local pizza place. It was a Friday, which meant we were slammed. Orders were piling up and everyone was hustling to keep up. Around 9 p.m., I got a delivery to a part of town that's a bit off. It's not that it's a bad area, but it's just really secluded. Lots of old houses spaced far apart, lots of trees, poor street lighting. You get the picture. I grabbed the pizza, a large pepperoni with extra cheese, and headed out in my car. The GPS took me on the usual route. then off onto this gravel road that wound through the woods. Creepy as heck, especially since fog was starting to roll in. I remember thinking how it felt like something out of a horror movie. Finally, I reached the house. It was this old Victorian-looking place with one of those wraparound porches. The wood was peeling and one of the upstairs windows was boarded up. Definitely seen better days. I walked up to the front door, pizza in hand, and rang the bell. No answer. I rang again, then knocked. Still nothing. I'm standing there, starting to feel uneasy because it's dead silent. No TV sounds, no talking, nothing. I called the number the customer had given when they ordered. It rang and rang, then went to voicemail. The message was just generic, no name or anything. At this point, I'm required to wait a full 5 minutes before I can leave. Store policy. So I figured I'd sit on the swing on the porch and wait out the time. As I'm sitting there, I hear something moving around inside the house like heavy footsteps. I stood up thinking they were coming to the door, but then it all went quiet again. Just as I'm about to leave, the door creaks open slowly. This guy is standing there and he looks rough. Unkempt beard, wild hair, and he's wearing a stained robe. He doesn't say anything, just stares at me. "Pizza delivery," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's $22.50. He just nods, turns around, and walks back inside, leaving the door open. I'm standing there, dumbfounded, not sure what to do. I mean, should I follow him in? That seemed like a bad idea. After a moment's hesitation, I step inside, just into the hallway, and I see him at the end of it, rummaging through a drawer in what looked like a little office area. The house smelled stale, like it hadn't been aired out in years. There were pictures all over the walls, all of them old black and white photos of what I assumed were family members. The whole vibe was just off. Finally, the guy comes back, hands me a wad of bills, and takes the pizza. I didn't bother counting the money right there. I just wanted to get out. As I turn to leave, he finally speaks, his voice raspy and low. "Watch your step as you go." I nodded, practically bolted down the porch steps, and got into my car. As I drove away, I looked in my rearview mirror. The guy was standing in the doorway, watching me leave. The fog had gotten thicker, and as I drove back down the gravel road, I felt this eerie sensation like I was being followed. I kept checking my mirrors until I got back onto the main road. When I finally stopped at a red light, I counted the money. He had given me $100, way over what the pizza cost. There was no note, no explanation, just the money. One night not too long ago, I was working the late shift at the pizza place. Around midnight, I got a delivery to a part of town I hadn't been to before. It was a remote area, surrounded by dense forest. The address led me down a narrow, winding road that seemed to go on forever. There were no streetlights, and the moon was hidden behind thick clouds, making it hard to see anything beyond the beams of my headlights. Finally, I arrived at the address. It was an old cabin, isolated and looking like it hadn't seen occupants in years. The wood was weathered, and ivy covered much of the exterior. The place gave off a vibe that just screamed haunted house in every possible way. I grabbed the pizza, a large meat lover's, and made my way to the front door. There was a rusty metal knocker in the shape of a lion's head. I used it, and the sound echoed eerily through the trees. After a few moments, the door creaked open slowly. Standing in the doorway was a young woman, probably in her early 20s. She was pale, with long black hair and wearing a white nightgown that made her look almost spectral in the dim light. "Hi, I have your delivery," I said, trying to keep my voice steady despite the unsettling atmosphere. She smiled, but it was a sad, distant sort of smile. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. She didn't take the pizza. Instead, she motioned for me to follow her inside. Normally, I wouldn't enter a customer's home, but something about her demeanor made me worry for her. Was she in some kind of trouble? Reluctantly, I stepped inside. The interior of the cabin was as run down as the outside. The furniture was draped in dusty covers, and there were no modern appliances or electronics in sight. It was like stepping back in time. The woman led me to a small table in the kitchen and finally took the pizza from me. As she opened the box, she suddenly seemed very sad. "He used to love this pizza," she said softly, almost to herself. I asked her who she meant, and she looked up at me with haunting eyes. "My brother," she said. He passed away, right here, a year ago today." I didn't know what to say. The air felt heavy, thick with unspoken words and the weight of her grief. She thanked me for bringing the pizza and handed me the money, exact change down to the cent. As she did, her hand brushed against mine. It was ice cold. I left the cabin quickly after that, feeling an urgent need to get away. When I got back to my car, I looked back at the cabin. The lights were off, and it looked completely abandoned. A chill ran down my spine as I realized that maybe her brother wasn't the only one who had died there. Driving away, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just delivered a pizza to a ghost, or maybe to a memory left lingering in that lonely, forgotten place. It was a Thursday night, and I was wrapping up my shift with one last delivery. The order was for a medium supreme pizza, and was going to a new development on the edge of town. The area was still under construction, with only a few houses completed and inhabited. Streetlights were few and far between, casting long shadows and making the freshly paved roads look like ribbons of darkness. I found the address, a freshly built house at the end of a cul-de-sac. The lawn was still just dirt, and the driveway was bare concrete, no car parked on it. I walked up to the front door and rang the bell. I could hear it echo inside, a hollow, lonely sound. There was no answer. I rang again, waiting and listening. Inside, I could hear footsteps approaching, slow and deliberate. The door swung open, and there stood a man, probably in his late 30s. He was tall, with a gaunt face and deep-set eyes that seemed too tired, too old for his age. "Evening," I greeted, trying to sound cheerful. "Pizza delivery." He nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "Thank you," he murmured, his voice low. He reached out to take the pizza, and that's when I saw his hands covered in dust and what looked like dried paint. It struck me as odd, the way he seemed almost out of place in his own home. He handed me a $50 bill for a $20 order and told me to keep the change. I thanked him, but before I could leave, he asked me a strange question. "Do you believe in ghosts?" Caught off guard, I wasn't sure how to respond. I guess I'm not sure," I replied. He nodded, as if he'd expected that answer. "I didn't either, until I moved here," he said, almost to himself. He pointed to a room off to the side of the hallway behind him. "That room there, I hear things at night, voices, footsteps, but there's never anyone there." I didn't really know what to say. Was he serious? Was this some kind of weird joke? Before I could think of a response, he continued, "Anyway, thank you for the pizza. Have a good night." He closed the door slowly, leaving me standing on the porch, the chill of the evening suddenly feeling colder. As I walked back to my car, I looked back at the house. The window to the room he had pointed out was dark, like a blank, watching eye. The whole way back to the pizzeria, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Was the man haunted by grief, by loneliness, or was it something else? Something that lingered in the unfinished homes and unpaved streets of that dark, quiet neighborhood. That delivery remains one of the most unsettling experiences I've had on the job. And sometimes when I pass by that development, I wonder if he found what he was looking for, or if the voices ever stopped calling to him from the empty air. It was a chilly October evening when I got called in for a last-minute shift. I didn't mind. Tips tend to be better as the nights get colder. My last delivery of the night was to an old apartment building I hadn't been to before. It was one of those massive brick structures that looked like it could have been an old hotel or something in a previous life. I pulled up outside and checked the order details. Apartment 401. The lobby was dimly lit and smelled like old books and dust. The elevator was out of order, which meant a trek up the stairs. By the time I reached the 4th floor, I was out of breath, but I found the door to 401 slightly ajar, which was odd. Knocking lightly, I pushed the door open a bit and called out, "Pizza delivery?" There was no answer, just the distant sound of a faucet dripping somewhere. The place had a strange, musty smell, and it was quiet. Too quiet. Since the door was open and I'd announced myself twice already, I stepped inside, thinking maybe someone was in the back and hadn't heard me. The apartment was sparsely furnished with just a few old pieces of furniture covered in sheets. The walls were lined with bookshelves filled with books and odd trinkets. I ventured further in, heading towards where I thought the kitchen might be. That's when I saw her. A woman, probably in her 60s, staring out the kitchen window with her back to me. She was so still, I wasn't sure she was even breathing. "Ma'am?" I said, announcing myself again. She didn't move, didn't acknowledge my presence at all. I approached cautiously, unsure of what was going on. "I have your pizza," I added, a bit louder. Suddenly she turned around and I almost dropped the pizza. Her face was pale, almost ghostly, and her eyes looked like they were looking right through me. "I didn't order any pizza," she said. Her voice was a hollow whisper. I was sure I had the right apartment, so I pulled out my phone to check the order details again, but as I looked at the screen it suddenly went blank, battery dead, which was strange because I had just charged it. Feeling more unnerved by the second, I apologized, mumbling something about a mistake, and backed towards the door. The woman followed me with her gaze, never moving from her spot. "Be careful," she said as I reached the door. "They don't like it when you leave too quickly." Her words sent a chill down my spine. I didn't ask who they were. I didn't want to know. I left the apartment quickly, nearly tripping over my feet as I rushed down the stairs. When I got back to the pizza place, I checked the delivery address again. There had been a mistake in the apartment number. It should have been 410, not 401. But that wasn't the only thing that bothered me. When I told my manager about the woman and the condition of the apartment, he went pale. He told me that apartment 401 had been empty for years, ever since the previous tenant had passed away in her sleep. The rest of the night, I kept thinking about the woman's last words to me. I still do, especially on quiet nights when the shadows seem a little too deep. Thank you for watching. If you found these stories gripping, don't forget to subscribe for more spine-tingling content. For another hair-raising tale, check out our suggested video. And if you're hungry for more eerie encounters, dive into our playlist featuring similar chilling narratives.